Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the chipped diner plate. The sound was small, but the laughter that followed wasn't. "Look at her," one of the boys sneered, his voice just loud enough for the entire booth to hear. "Can't even hold a fork right." Sophie's cheeks burned hot. She bent down quickly, fumbling with shaky fingers to retrieve the utensil from the greasy floor tiles. Her left hand, weakened from cerebral palsy, betrayed her again, trembling, stiff, unwilling to grip. The laughter grew louder. "Careful, don't stab yourself," another voice chimed in, dripping with cruelty. Sophie swallowed hard, forcing her trembling hand to place the fork back on the table. She kept her eyes on her plate of half-eaten pancakes, praying they'd lose interest. But they didn't. "Bet she drools on her food, too," one of them said. The group erupted again, slapping the table, pointing. Her chest tightened. Every bite she had struggled to take that morning now tasted like chalk. She hated this, hated being seen, hated being reminded that she was different in ways she couldn't change. The diner, usually her safe spot, with its smell of bacon and strong coffee, had turned into a spotlight of shame. The waitress, a tired woman with crow's feet at the edges of her eyes, lingered by the counter, unsure. She gave Sophie a sympathetic glance, but didn't step in. Nobody did. Sophie pressed her good hand flat against her lap, nails digging into her thigh. "Don't cry. Don't give them what they want." But her eyes were already stinging when the bell over the diner door jingled. The sound was nothing unusual, but the air shifted. Boots, heavy as thunder, hit the linoleum floor. The laughter died mid-echo, hanging awkwardly in the air. Sophie looked up. 3 men walked in, their leather jackets patched with flames and skulls, backs proudly bearing the words, "Hell Angels." They carried themselves like a storm had followed them in. Massive, scarred, eyes sharp as broken glass. One had a beard that brushed his chest, another had tattoos crawling up his neck, and the third had arms thick as oak branches. The diner fell silent, except for the squeak of a waitress setting down a coffee pot too quickly. Even the jukebox in the corner seemed to hum lower, as though it too knew better than to compete with their presence. Sophie's tormentors shrank into their booth, their earlier bravado slipping off like melted butter. The bearded biker paused in the doorway, scanning the room with slow, deliberate eyes. He noticed everything. His gaze landed on Sophie, on her shaking hands, her flushed cheeks, and the 4 boys across from her, who suddenly couldn't make eye contact with anyone. The bearded man's lip curled. "What's going on here?" Nobody answered. The waitress busied herself with refilling coffee cups, her hand trembling just slightly. Sophie wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink into the cracked vinyl seat and be forgotten. But the biker's eyes didn't let her. He tilted his head, waiting. One of the boys coughed. Nothing, just hanging out." "Just hanging out," the tattooed one repeated, stepping closer. His voice was low, dangerous, like a growl under the hood of a muscle car. Sounded like more than that. The tallest boy tried to smile. "We weren't doing anything, just messing around." The biker with the tattoos leaned his fists onto their table, the wood creaking under his weight. He bent down so his face was inches from the boys. "Messing around with who?" Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to shout, Don't make it worse!" But her voice stayed locked behind her teeth. The bearded one didn't look at the boys again. Instead, he walked toward Sophie's booth. Each step echoed. He slid onto the seat across from her, without asking, the leather of his jacket squeaking against the vinyl. For a terrifying moment, Sophie thought he was about to mock her, too. But then he spoke. "You okay, sweetheart?" His voice was rough but not unkind, like gravel under a steady boot. Sophie blinked. Nobody had asked her that all morning. I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. The biker glanced at her plate, then back at the boys. "Don't look fine to me." The other two angels moved closer, blocking the boys in their booth. The kids looked like cornered animals now, wide-eyed and pale. The bearded biker leaned back, studying Sophie. "Tell me their names." Sophie's breath caught. She shook her head quickly. "Please don't." The man didn't argue. Instead, he turned his gaze on the boys again. "You know what I hate most in this world? Cowards. Grown men who pick on someone smaller, weaker, just to feel big. That's low. That's beneath even us." The tattooed biker chuckled darkly. "And trust me, that's saying something." The boys stammered apologies, tripping over each other's words. "We didn't mean, we were just joking." "Shut it." The biker's hand slammed the table so hard the ketchup bottle rattled. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every patron in the diner sat frozen, coffee cups halfway to their lips, breaths held. The bearded biker looked back at Sophie. "You eat, sweetheart. Don't let idiots ruin your meal." He stood, his shadow stretching long over her. Then, with a nod to the waitress, he tossed a wad of cash on the counter. "For her breakfast, and keep the change." The waitress, wide-eyed, scooped it up quickly. Yes, sir." The biker started toward the door, but before leaving, the tattooed one turned back to the boys. His smile was cold. "If I ever hear about you bothering her or anyone like her again, we'll be back. And trust me, you don't want that." The boys nodded furiously, their faces drained of all color. And then the angels were gone. The bell jingled once more, and the storm walked out as suddenly as it had arrived. For a moment, the diner was still. Then the conversations resumed, softer than before, as though people were afraid the walls might remember. Sophie stared at her plate. Her pancakes were cold, syrup congealed at the edges, but her chest felt lighter. She picked up her fork, still shaky, still clumsy, and took a bite. The waitress returned, placing a fresh glass of orange juice on her table. "On the house, honey," she said gently. "You're braver than most folks in here." Sophie managed a small smile. Maybe she didn't feel brave, but for once, she didn't feel invisible either. Across the diner, the boys sat in silence, their earlier laughter a ghost that wouldn't return. And as Sophie chewed her pancake, she realized something she didn't before. Sometimes, strength doesn't come from muscles or loud voices. Sometimes it comes from strangers who remind the world to stop and look, to see the person, not the weakness. She didn't know their names, and she probably never would, but she knew she'd never forget the day the Hell Angels walked in.